Hi there. Wait for folks to join.
Do you think people will join today?
I have no idea. I mean, I hope so.
Okay, I'm gonna
I,
go on mute.
yeah, sure. I mean, I'm just kind of waiting to see. I mean, it's not canceled, so people joined yesterday in the FPGA meeting. So
Yeah, but I think what's happened is that since we always give them a 5 minute buffer, many of them take that 5 minutes now just by default.
that might be the case. Yeah. Well, we'll start at 5 after regardless. So I'm not going to wait. And whoever's here. Yeah. Hey there. We'll wait until 5 after. Um, Hopefully we'll get more folks trickling in. Hi there. We'll wait another minute or so. Hi there. Yeah, we'll go ahead and start. And hopefully other folks will join. Um, Go ahead and share my screen here. Yeah, so just a recap from last week. Well, here's the agenda I sent out. The recap, pretty much it was pretty light attendance last week, but we went through the fruit packaging tool demo, and that is available out there on the. If you didn't see that, I do believe I sent out I had this open, but I had the replays have I've time to time have been putting them out here. Actually, I need to go ask the guy to, I think his name's Kevin, to go ahead and put all the replays out here. But I put it here. 10/23/25 is the replay for the fruit packaging tool. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up, it is the, I'll talk about it now. The fruit packaging tool vote. I sent out a message on it. Basically, yeah, this actually shows you where the thing is. The idea, all this is just asking is, we voting on having the fruit packaging tool listed on the MHS wiki page. That's all it is, because it's already sitting there publicly available in GitHub or today, the OCP GitHub. But Brian Esmes had asked, for us to have a vote. So if you haven't voted, please do. I'll probably, by next week, see if we've got critical mass, and if not, I'll send out a reminder. But pretty much the idea is let's at least have a link on the MHS wiki page that points to this, as a contribution. So pretty simple, straightforward. But so go ahead with the schedule review here. I'll go ahead and show you where we are. The schedule. So for today, just we're at 10:30. Gonna talk about the webinar and some of these other topics. And really wanted to have a discussion about OBMF and open platform firmware intersection. I was going to bring up the slides from their the summit talks, just to say, well, what do we think about that? Some of us are already members of that, so and just to FYI, HP is working on joining. But what I'd like to do is just, get an opinion as to what things we should talk to them about regarding the OBMF sort of intersection. And sort of, the next couple of weeks really try to, really want to spend, one is the time on the webinar slides and kind of dividing it up. And two is, kind of taking a look at, some of what these external groups are doing that intersect potentially with what we're doing. And just trying to understand, what should we, talk to them about, and what if we're in those other work streams, bring it up as a topic to say, hey, can you look at this, or we'll try to understand, where they are on certain things. So we'll talk about that in a minute here. But that's, if you look at the schedule, that's kind of what, I'm kind of shifting a few things around. But the idea is I'll shifting gears to the webinar here. So one of the things that came up was the fact that the 11th of November is a U.S. federal holiday. It's Veterans Day. So I bumped it out by a week. So we do have the webinar scheduled on the 18th. That's actually locked in now. And I told, the Michael Schill, who's the OCP, I guess, one of the CTO people or something. Not sure what his real title is, or official title is, but the 18th, and then on the 2nd is the FPGA webinar. We decided that yesterday in the FPGA meeting. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and show you here that we are official. This is the Open Computing upcoming events, and we are an upcoming event here on the 18th. It's OCP Tech Talk, not an educational webinar, but a tech talk. And it does have a registration. So what I'm going to do is reach out to Brian Asnes, have him point to this, because this is where you would register, and presumably we're going to have a specific Zoom meeting set up by OCP. Date and time 12. It should be 10 to 12 p.m. here. I need to have them adjust this. So if you look at this, it says 10 to 12. Okay, well, anyway, point is, I want to make sure that they get it right. So I'll ask them to adjust this. But in the meantime, we'll get it situated. But yeah, this is November 18th. So I've been focused on getting initial slide deck together. From basically what here I'm going to put 11/18. So basically, what I would I would like by next week to sort of divide out some of these slides for folks who can help with the deck. Also looking for at least 2 more speakers so that it's not me speaking for an hour and a half. And I think it's be better to have multiple speakers. So I'm definitely taking some volunteers. Anybody who would like to volunteer for this one, and obviously the FPGA one as well. But we'll be putting out the call for that. You can either send me a note, separately, or if you want to volunteer, right now, that's fine too. But I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But like I said, at least looking for 2 volunteers. Any questions on that so far?
No.
Okay. Well, great. So looking for 2 volunteers. I've kind of divided this up, but I'm going to go into more detail next week. Kind of some more time to fill this out. And kind of the idea with the Fruit Discovery boot, this particular webinar, we're going to dig. We're going to provide more upfront context around the problem statement. I'm working through that. I'm probably going to use some of the slides. I kind of adapted one of the slides from our OCP Summit presentation, but I'll adapt some of those and give us a bit more context in this one, and then in the FPGA one, I'll just kind of say, well, remember part 1. This is really a 2-part series, and I want to stress that even if you don't go to the second part, please don't skip the first part, because you're going to get a lot of context. Or at least watch the replay of the first part. Yeah, so pretty much looking through here. I'm not going to go through all the slides right now, but I'm going to just show you here that we talked about this last time. I started I've added more, and and so I'm kind of in the add a lot and then cut back if need be. It is going to be an hour and a half of content with 30 minutes of Q&A, and it's a long time, but unfortunately, you really need that in order to dive deeply into this. So I've got a lot of slides that I've added around the discovery process and trying to explain that. And I'll kind of go through that. It definitely needs a lot more work. I mean, it is quite big there. So, but still needs a lot more work. The fruit layout, I think I've got a decent amount of content here. I'm going to definitely swizzle and adjust it. But I'm going to get in the initial content and then kind of go from there. There's a lot of conversation about the JSON as well. We'll probably actually have some, probably show a little bit of the, an overview of, a mock-up and a schema. Probably just won't spend too much time diving into it just because it's another huge topic. But certainly would want to, put out a poll or something where if there's interest in people having us dive, spend an hour or more into the schemas, etc. Then we'll probably just sort of do a quick overview. Then there's a number of these what I would call additional topics, like security, extensibility, etc. Um, and the, you know, so look, we're already way up there in slides. So understand that it is a lot, and we do plan on, trying to reduce it down some, as much as we think we can. And some slides we won't spend a ton of time on. So, um, certainly, as we're putting it together, if we get it down to, about 30 to 40 slides, I think that'll be pretty good. And like I said, some slides you won't spend too much time on. Anyway, so any other questions on the webinar?
No.
Okay, yeah, so definitely would like a couple people to help out with the speaking portion of it, and would like to have folks. Next week we'll talk about dividing out any of the sections, and I'll put it up on the Google Drive, for folks to help contribute, as far as the cleaning up or fine tuning, adjusting, etc.
So when will you put out the slides? At the end
Yeah,
of the week? Or?
yeah, early next week. I need
Okay.
a few more days here, and then I'll send out a note. That one will be out first, obviously, because it's the one that's sooner, and the other one's
Mhm.
2 weeks later. So not nearly as much. Um, from an urgency perspective, it's still important. But yeah, that one will be the one I'll send out first. So yeah, so that's pretty much it there. You know, that's the webinar. Finalizing the scope. I think we also looked at this last week, and basically I think we were all pretty much in agreement with the scope. Um, if you look here, 0.7 scope, I kind of tried to assign some priorities. I mean, it's kind of like hey, this is the 0.7. We want to get as much done as possible. So I kind of put this first one as a P0, and I'm going to reach back out to Tim to see if there's some other, items or some other details on this topic, just trying to make sure, he gave us some things here. But I need to ask him if there's some other, content that needs to be added in this particular topic, since it was one that he brought up. So, um, here. So that's just on my to-do list. So I'll see if he's got anything else. Then we could add to that. Um, and I'll figure out where that falls in the, on the schedule. We agreed that this one was in there. Nested P cards. I'm gonna ask him, because I think this was one he brought up as well. Um, so not here, but these were items that he brought up. So let's say make it cute. NVMe hot plug. I mean, this is one we needed more discussion on, direct attach versus switch. And we kind of talked about, well, do we want to teach hot plug in general? And that's something I think we needed more discussion on. So I've got it scheduled as a topic, maybe guidance added to the spec. Basically, I'll not sure who would own this. I'll just own it for now, and then just rediscovery procedure. We do read that, yes, but it needed more discussion. I don't know. I guess this is kind of a, yeah. I'm not entirely sure. I'll put it on it's on the agenda. So I mean, both of these are going to be on the agenda, and we can kind of put together a couple sketches or something. It's on the agenda. So air pass and tab pass, that's really, this is on a per section basis. I know we've got, it really is actually when we review this section, so discovery, process, add in SAD pass. I'll what we can do when we plan is when we review that section, and add in the air paths. So it's on the agenda to review those sections. So, I guess, I'll put my name on it and we'll just review it as a group. So this next kind of whole section here is all maybe, and this is where we wanted to have a conversation today. Now we don't have enough, barely, we don't really have critical mass per se, but we can still have a discussion about it. Is really the, any of these early, and really, I think what we have to have is guidance around early boot. But if we can, hand off to OBMF as much as possible and say, hey, look, and that's the thing I don't quite understand. And we can talk about this in a few minutes, but it's really, trying to understand how to enable this, how to enable, the BMC knowing, hey, these are the interfaces that it's going to be talking to the host. I think we can get that from the JSON file. So to me, that's something that can be added in there. It should know what's connected to the host, and which interfaces are going to be up early, so that you can during that early boot phase, you can use what and it, like I said, if we can leverage, I guess, the OBMF's ICP, which is the interface consolidation protocol, that's great. And it's if MMBI is just one of the channels, I'll talk about this in a second, but a little bit more. But that would be great, because then we could just hand off, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So I'm just gonna say here, I'll put my name on all this and just say, well, I'm gonna it's on the agenda review. It's on the agenda to review this. This is something basically the next couple of weeks, we'd like to talk about OBMF intersection and and open platform firmware intersection, because they've got that they're trying to do around configuration, And, I'm going to reach back out to those guys. I spoke with them during OCP Summit and say, hey, you're having a meeting, you want to talk about, what you guys are doing and how you can leverage what we've already got out there. I mean, they mentioned that they were going to go ahead and review the specs, but, if there's something I can help them out with or any of us can help them out with, then that would be great. So, so that's this, crew cert, all the security guidance. Yes, it's on the schedule. We're going to review those sections, see if there's anything else that needs to be done. I'll put my name on it to say, when we get to those sections, at least, hey, here's the things that we think are missing. We already do have some of this information in there. I think there's some things around we want to, be able to, intersect with, what SPDM and DMTF are doing. Actually, I'm gonna put Bill's name in as well because, that was something we were. I'll just copy both of us. I'll talk to him about that and see. Is there some point at which we can, reference something in the like DSP 220 or something else? It's that. So this continue work on automation tool. So I'm still working on. So the one that I've been working on is the FPGA JSON. I'll have a demo of that probably in the next couple of weeks here. It's getting pretty close to being done. And the idea is it creates an initial version of the JSON file for the FPGA. That really is what I would consider to be like a requirements JSON, where it outlines the things that you want in your FPGA image. I'll put together a presentation on it. I'll probably show it in the FPGA meeting, but it does kind of overlap with what's going on here because it's the JSON, self-describing file for the FPGA. Anyway, so that's the point there. Other automation tools. I guess Milan, I don't know if you know the progress on getting the tool that David was working on, the netlist tool, if we think that's still on track for.
Yeah, I think it's still working towards trying to get something out by the end of the year.
Okay, great.
It's just trying to get through some of the internal procedures, I suppose.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's definitely, excited to see that. We've been working on one, a bit on the side. But it looked like you guys were further along and we're kind of hitting, maybe we're approaching the, some of the problems from a little bit of a different angle, but may not be that different. So, maybe there's something, especially around, handling muxes that was really the no install components. Those were the two items that were really kind of the more challenging, to solve, those particular areas. So it might be, and it may make sense that we proceed using what you contribute as the, we help contribute to that going forward.
Yeah,
but some of the learnings that we've had from our own investigations, and then try to combine some of that. Actually, one of the things that this reminds me, and I'm going to add it, is netlist convention. That's something that we've been wanting to address because we definitely see that that's probably one of the biggest issues is that you get inconsistencies in netlist naming. And, I think there needs to be a prefix kind of root suffix kind of thing that we need to, propose, and I think that's a separate spec. To if you want to enable these tools, follow this netlist convention. Yes, you can have a config file that does, translates between maybe your netlist names and sort of the more, the standard netlist names that you would see like, on the, the SCI, pinout, for like I2C0, I2C1, etc. So you could, but you need to follow these rules as you pass through muxes and add, and switches and things like that. So, that's kind of what, we're seeing is that, it's fine if everybody kind of sticks to a, hey, I've got I2C0, or maybe I call it I2C S0 or G0 or whatever, but you have a mapping file that says, well, I might have called it G4 or something, I2C underscore G4, but it's connected to SCI, I2C1, so you did some little swizzling there. Okay, fine. We can accommodate that. But if you start changing the I2C bus, fundamentally the name as you're proceeding through each, from, mux to mux to segment, you start off as being I2C4, but then you change it to I2C1, and then, you know what I mean? Then it starts to get hairy, and you're not able to connect the dots. So it's much more challenging. So that's what I mean, is that there's some bus, some netlist name conventions, especially around buses and getting through muxes, and or going, across the termination resistor or some 0 ohm resistor, or, if you've got, different level shifters and this and that, there's a bunch of these different, things that can cause, these rule exceptions. So let's not do that. Let's just stick to, hey, if you go across a level shifter, it's this. If you go across a termination resistor, it's that. So that, you can connect the dots between one side of the net and the other, one net and the other net, that it's the same bus. So that's kind of the idea. So we'll put together a proposal for that. I mean, it's something that, honestly, internally with HP, I thought we had a convention, and it turns out, well, people don't follow those conventions. So it needs to be more strictly enforced. And if you have a tool that can help you enforce it, all more the better, because, it can get kind of Wild West out there if you start letting people do whatever. And now it makes, reading the schematic more complicated and challenging. And, let's just focus on, let's adopt something. Let's see if we can get everybody to agree, at least, the sort of the schema of it, if you will, that, you have a certain prefixes, suffixes for certain things, and you have a root for certain, and you can kind of, handle it that way. And let's not, create a big, just because you'd end up having to have some config file that has all these exceptions and rules for, why you named something completely differently and weird. So anyway, so I'll put my name on that. I think it's a P1, but I think it's something that's gonna make the automation tools that much easier to handle. Doing the netlist to JSON. So, I guess, this would be, I'll put my name here. I'll put, I guess I'll put David's name for the other tool. I guess, Nilan, are you going to help with that too? Or is that just all David, or what?
It's mainly David, but I'll check with him. And yeah, you can put my name.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll put yes, Intel for the JSON tool, HP for PGH JSON tool. And then, I know we wanted to have some sort of a tool to handle, the JSON to like device tree. So I know, Chitrik, you had a number of tools that you wanted to at some point contribute, I guess. So what tools would those be?
Yeah, so those will be AI. So I think we discussed during the OCP, right? So we are working on some of those tools which will take a schema definition or the fru definition files and it will create the device tree definitions, the DTS-DTSI file. So that is what we are working on, and it will take a couple of months to a quarter, where we can have some thing that we can show off.
Okay, great. Yeah, so maybe what, in Q1 next year, you think that you'll be able
Yes,
to?
yeah, yes, Q1 would be a good time.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's great. So, I mean, I think those are the key tools. We've already got the, through packaging tool out there, and there's a few odds and ends that we're gonna do around that tool, but I feel like it's pretty complete for the most part. Just a little bit of additional odds and ends to clean up and stuff. So I mean, aside from those are the main.
Yeah, I had a question, Phil. So probably one thing that I think we talked about the netlist files, right? So
Yeah.
one thing that we started off with was like schema diagrams that did not kind of work well. And then we talked about, I think Todd was also there. We talked about a standardization of netlist files.
Yeah, that's the netlist.
Yeah. So do you have any like example netlist that we can also consume? Because we are not a hardware company, right, as such, right? So it's always difficult to get our hands on some of this definition. So if something that we can work on, I think we can feed it into our models and start at that. It will be helpful.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's what kind of the netlist to JSON tool is more of a deterministic instead of using AI.
Yeah.
But you can use an AI agent to use this, that particular, tool,
Yeah.
So as far as example netlists, I think you look at OCP, contributions.
Yeah, that's yeah. If it's there, I'll just pick it up.
And that's something we'd like to look and see, what's out there, because that's ideally what would be a great test of the netlist to JSON tool, and to say, hey, let's extract out the netlist out of that. It may be a Allegro board file, or maybe just a Gerber file, but you should be able to get a netlist.
Sure.
And that's and so that's a good test to see what's out there and what we can take it as far as actual board layouts. But yeah, I think that's a something we can look at doing. Find those example net lists and run them through and see what happens with the tool. And it may be interesting, like the tool is pretty much focused on a net list from an Allegro board file. But the question is, are there other formats, other netlist formats? And if so, is there something where you could use AI to translate from that format to the format the tool needs? I mean, that might be a good use of AI. Have to think about that. Yeah. So, to look at the OCP contributions database.
Yeah, I'll check on that.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to go ahead and I'll put your name there.
Sure.
And look and see what's out there, see if and then we can decide how to take those and run them through as test cases. But
absolutely, thank you. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah. So these are some items. I'm kind of looking at see how this can fit in the schedule. It may stretch out the schedule a little bit longer than we expected, but I did have a 0.9 plan, and that we'd eat into that. That's fine, because there's a number of items that we need to work through here, before we release a 0.7. Yeah, so I think that's good for the scope. Any other items we should add scope wise? I think this is good. Or we, if they have anything in mind, please by all means put at it. Okay, well, as we proceed and work through these items, we may find some additional items, and that's not unexpected. So, yeah. So back to the schedule. So I guess today we can start talking about the OBMF intersection. What I'd like everybody to do is, well, you guys are involved in OBMF, right? Or I don't know if you personally, but your companies are.
Yeah,
So,
Intel is involved, but I haven't been directly involved with it. So, but I know the person that's driving it.
yeah. So I think, please, look at their, check out the presentation. It's here if you haven't had a chance to look at the, their presentation and, from the summit, please do. I've watched it. I'm putting together some questions, which are, I'm going to just kind of walk through their presentation here. I'm not going to go through everything in all the detail, but I guess Chitrik, you aren't part of this. I thought you were, but at least but I don't know if you're planning on joining us or not.
AMI is, I need to find
get
out.
on the list here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, HP should be joining soon. We're just trying to get the CLA signed. So
yeah.
Yeah. So I think to me, I mean, it's great. It's a great idea. I mean, it's certainly a lot of protocols, a lot of things, and if we can get them all running over, pick a bus or one or two buses, maybe an eSpy or I3C, USB, whatever. That's a great idea because it makes it a lot easier. And now you don't need to, necessarily plumb as many of these buses because that's, definitely a pain to have to do, multiple I2Cs or multiple, UARTs or blah blah blah. You know what I mean? You guys are, you guys know. But the point, what I'm trying to understand is, talking about how early is this, because I look at the protocol stack and it's addressing early boot time. And so that's the thing I'm trying to understand is, is the, because USB isn't typically early, it takes, it would have to have some, silicon enablement, on the host silicon side to be able to support that. And it mentions other ones. So I guess I'm trying to understand is, how early can we depend on this being available? This is early boot, but to me, that's the biggest question.
I think it would need to be available early on, and like the firmware on the CPU would have to be driving this way.
Yeah. Both ends would have to be aware that this is a bus that supports this, right? And so I don't have a good understanding of the advertisement of that, So is it?
There might be a need. I think there's probably an intersection between and this is essentially maybe the FRU as a way of discovering what's there.
So that would be, the thing I'd like to understand is this: can we add this? Hey, this bus supports this protocol, or this is the early bus that you want to use, or one or more. I mean, it could be a couple.
Just like maybe we might still need. I don't know if they still have it in there, like an I2C as a.
They show I3C, I2C. I mean, they're kind of.
Yeah, but that's for the tunneling of the data, right? But I think like the I2C to the FRU might be to discover what's there.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is, so say one or more of these buses enables, is one, it's early and it supports this, the ICP, the OBMF ICP, so that would be a candidate for use for having that early boot conversation between host and BMC. So that could be what, we add in, the JSON file is saying, yeah, this is connected to the host and it's connected to, an interface that the host supports, this protocol stack, or is something that is enabled. And I don't know if there's anything in host silicon that would help enable this or not, or would need to be, have to be aware of that, or if it's all strictly biased. That's the thing. I'm not sure if there's something that.
No, I think some of it will have to be in the silicon, right? Because if it's before the BIOS puts, like in the firmware of the chip itself.
Or maybe it's just all completely firmware, and you don't have to worry about if there's something that needs to be in the host silicon to enable it.
Like the microcode of the chip. Right.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing I'm not sure about. So, but I mean,
yeah, I think some of this will be in that level. Yeah.
Sorry, what? I didn't catch that.
Was Arun speaking? No. Yeah, no. I think some of this would have to be at the at the firmware, like the microcode level of the CPU.
Okay.
And then before even the BIOS comes up.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, well, how can we sort of compartmentalize this to say, well, what's the modular plug and play involvement?
Well, if you have like a through to. Yeah. Because as the assuming that's because that's on the platform, and then so the platform can tell you what the CPU is capable of, and then from there you can then initialize your BMC to search for that interface.
Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking it's just another attribute on a particular bus, and that bus being connected to the host that it says it supports this. Maybe that's enough, and so that's what I would, go to that, when, we get a chance to meet in the, and I'll probably send a message out, to, I guess what's it, Janus? I can't remember pronounce this. Is it Janus?
Yeah, it's Janus. Just I think he goes by JJ. That's just
JJ. Okay, I'll ask JJ about this and say, hey, this is something we'd like to bring up, when we join, the intersection here. What can we do in the modular plug and play to support this? What are the things we need to have in the through, or is there anything else we need to incorporate? Just to ensure that BMC understands, what it discovers, it knows which interfaces are allowed for it to use that. I think that's really it, though. Ideally, I'd like to, like I said, just kind of basically, point to this spec as much as possible and say, well, it's up to you as to and it's the interoperability around boot is handled here, right? And then we don't have to really spend as much time other than just enabling this. So yeah. So that's the OBMF, and I feel a little bit more comfortable and solid with this. As far as aligning. One of the things to look at here is the open platform firmware guys. They're looking at this unified platform configuration interface, and this is another one I recommend you checking out if you get a chance. And this is one that has sort of the least amount of content. So here's their presentation here. I spoke with them, and I need to reach back out and say, hey, did you guys take a look at what we're doing in modular plug and play, or do you want to leverage it? Do you want to how do we align? But they were talking about trying to coming up with this single source of platform information, reuse of board configuration components. There's that's their goals. Well, great. So can you use what we already have that we're going to have in the through? Can you use that JSON file that you kind of spent time talking about? And I watched. I couldn't attend their presentation, but I watched the replay. And they're spending a lot of time talking about. And I think it's a bit more focused on firmware consumables. And they've got some slides to kind of show that in a bit here. But they kind of go between back and forth with, how do human readable representation, which is JSON, and then machine readable and providing tooling to convert back and forth. Basically, they were concerned about the size efficiency, but no, I mean, when we compress the JSON file, it's yeah, it's not going to be as efficient as binary packed, but then you don't have to have all the overhead of defining all the structures and you end up with a whole lot of complexity because we've been down that path before. So
Is this firmware group responsible? Is focused more on the BIOS side of things, or is it
no,
on PnP?
both BIOS and PnP. So
Or both?
yeah, so kind of I think more on the BMC side is sort of leveraging open BMC, but but the point is that yeah, they're trying to define this. I'm gonna kind of the interest of time here to kind of scooch up to what they're doing here. So they're looking at frameworks and they're choosing the format, allow multiple binary formats and conversion between binary. I mean, I don't know if these guys are going down the right path or not, but but they're still their options are use a source format that can produce YAML or JSON and then convert that to binary buffers and then so like okay great and they're going off on a crafting there's a YAML and a JSON example and I'm like okay so what are the things that here's the things that they're trying to define or like hey this addresses for TPMs and where the things like that okay are you gonna have but I don't think the content is exactly the same, but there's some overlap on certain things. So I want to get back with them to understand, what it is, the things that they're trying to describe, and then versus the things that we're describing, and try to say, look, don't duplicate what we're doing. Take the JSON file and extract out whatever you need, and if you want to pack it into binary somewhere handoff binary structures. You can do that. We're talking about ACPI tables and building. So that's kind of the thing. You just need to get a better sense of, the problems that they're trying to solve seem very broad. But then when I look at it, it's like, well, is it? Yeah. So this is like post firmware to BMC firmware. That's look at that. Vertical, they're saying, going between security processes and processors, host firmware. That's the interfaces they're talking about. Host firmware kernel code. Okay. Silicon init code. They're trying to encode platform information. But here's the area where I think we've got the most overlap as the post firmware to BMC firmware. And that to me is the place where we need to understand okay, well, can BMC firmware, it's going to collect all this discovery data from JSON files. Are they saying, well, now encode this some other way to pass it to host firmware? I mean, what are they wanting to do? Let's work together to align rather than what I don't want them to do is to go off and just try to duplicate exactly what we've already done because that just seems like a waste of effort. Let's talk about if there's things that we should have encoded in JSON that they need, that might be great, but it does seem like there's a lot of other things that aren't going to be found in the JSON files that are going to be through EPROMs. They're from some other things. So we just need to understand it. Is it makes sense for it to be defined in within this work stream, or is it something that should be defined someplace else, whether it's OBMF or if it's some other, or if they want to define it. But yeah, just want things to align and not go off into silos and create, you know, completely new, you know, systems
Yeah.
of, yeah. I
Yet
mean,
another schema.
yet another schema, yet another file, you know, this, you know, I mean, it just becomes huge and a lot more to, you know, kind of.
Is anybody from HP in that group, or is this no?
This is the you know, open platform from OPF group, and this is what these guys are running this particular
But
configuration.
which companies are mainly involved in that?
So Felix is AMI. Well, Felix is AMI, and Patrick just left. But
Oh, so
inside,
it's just yeah, so basically the BIOS BMC kind of vendors.
right. And so let's get other folks to, you know, align with them and see if they can, you know, you know, it's great that they're going off and doing this, but let's try to align so
Maybe
that we're.
Citric could kind of give an overview of what they. I don't know if it's the.
Yeah. Well, he dropped, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and this is because he understands hopefully both sides. If it's.
Yeah, and so maybe that's something that he and he can bring Felix in here since he's AMI, and they can talk about it and say, hey, is there some way we can, you know, take what, you know, what they're doing, or they can you know, point to what we're doing and say, hey, this is, ideally we could say, you know, they might build upon it with some other things, but they point to, hey, modular plug and play is going to provide all this information that's part, you know, a lot of, you know, hardware description, here you go, and then from there you take that and turn it into whatever binary pack structures that they want to hand between, you know, and then, but, you know, ideally they're using those binary pack structures over, you know, what OBMF is defined. It's just one of the channels, you know, maybe MMBI or something there where it says, hey, I'm going to, you know, hand things, you know, the platform configuration information between, you know, BIOS and BMC on this particular channel. And there you go. And then it all works together. If they just, you know, we just need to understand, you know, what they're defining and how it, you know, intersects and you know, and then get that alignment. So yeah, I think I'll mention it to Chitrick if he can go ahead and bring Felix in here, and, you know, at some point in the next, they were supposed to have like a 0.3 of their spec, so maybe they're busy working on that. I'll, like I said, I'll have to ping them and find out where they are, you know, since it's, you know, I talked to them over the summit, and you know, just try to understand, you know, hey, when can you come on in, you know, and present? Maybe that's what they can do, is coming in and present in the, you know, in one of these calls, or we, you know, carve out some, you know, an hour for them to present, and then we can talk about, okay, you know, I mean, I certainly want them to have had a chance to review the specs, as you know, the PnP specs as well. So, you know, I don't know if they're busy trying to get a 0.3 out, then, but we'll figure out when they can do that so that we can, you know, get that alignment, get that, you know, a meeting together to discuss it, because I want to make sure that we're, you know, on the same page.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we'll talk again next week and keep plugging away on this and go from there.
All right. Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
Bye.
Yesterday. Bye-bye.